Hi, this is Lisa, Creative Sewing Center. So today I wanted to talk about needles. A lot of variety in needles, and sometimes it gets a little confusing when we talk about needles. What is it that we're really talking about? So I wanted to show you, have a great a picture reference right here on my needle board. Our most basic needle is called the universal, and the universal is a universal because of the tip. So the tip is called a modified ballpoint. It's a little bit rounded. The needle has a smaller eye as compared to a top stitching needle, which we'll look at it in a moment. But the universal is kind of the jack of all trades needle. So if you're not sure, typically universal is going to work. It'll work with pretty much your standard not your standard wovens and and some of your knits too. It'll work with kind of your standard knits. The ballpoint, which is going to be more rounded at the tip, is a true knit needle. So like your t-shirt knits, your cotton knits, not the super stretchy lycra. That goes both ways. It stretches both ways. Your workout clothes, that's also a knit, but that's a different kind of knit. If you try to use your ballpoint with that knit, you will often see skip stitches. And if you are seeing that, you're experiencing that, then you want to change to a stretch needle. And the stretch needle actually goes the opposite direction, and it has a very sharp point, very sharp point. Other needles that we do have, we have the jeans denim needle. So if you're working with denim, you want to use the jeans denim needle or something that's equally thick like that particular fabric. It has a very sharp point. It's going to pierce the fibers rather than let the fibers push around. So for instance, with the knits, we want to have the rounded tip because it's going to tend to separate those fibers and go between them. With the and by the way, the reason we want to do that is because we don't want to run. With the jeans denim needle, we want to actually pierce through the individual fibers. We don't want the fibers to push the needle around. It looks kind of like you've got a zigzag going on your stitch when you're really doing straight stitch. If you use, let's say, a universal needle, the stitch quality will not look as good. So for that, we want to use a jeans needle so that we pierce the individual fibers. If you're doing decorative sewing, the top stitch needle is going to be very sharp and pointy. It has a very large eye. So now we're into a very large eye. Your top stitch threads are typically more delicate threads, and they tend to break a little bit more. So with our top stitch needle, that larger eye, it allows the threads to flow through, and it will not break them as much. So it gives you a lot of relief from breaking of threads. With our embroidery needle, you're going to see the same large eye. So if you're doing in the hoop embroidery or you're doing the embroidery stitches, this needle will also work. The difference is going to be the tip. The tip is a modified ballpoint, just like the universal. So this top stitch, which has the large eye, is going to be very sharp and pointy, versus the embroidery needle, which will have a modified ballpoint. Personally, I prefer to use the top stitch needle when I do in the hoop embroidery and when I do decorative sewing. I like that really sharp point. So that's my go-to needle. There's also a metallic needle, has a large eye. Again, it's a decorative thread that's a much more sensitive thread, more likely to break. So that's got, and it also has some special coating for you. We have a sharp needle that has a wedge shape, and these are for your microfibers, and those are woven. So it's going to be pretty densely woven, and it's pretty specialized. So a needle that probably most of us don't tend to need to use. The final needle I wanted to talk about today is the quilting needle, and I think a lot of us really love to quilt. This is a long tapered needle. It has a standard eye. We're using a cotton thread probably most of the time when we're quilting, but it has a long, tapered, very sharp point. This needle I think is really good when we're doing piecing, and also if you're quilting. So, and the quilting, by the way, if you're not familiar with what my terminology here, quilting is after you've pieced your top and you have this beautiful top ready to go, you're going to layer it with batting and then a backing underneath that. Those three layers, to put those together, stitch those together, that's actually the quilting part when you stitch through all three layers. So the quilting needle is good, again, for both the piecing and for the quilting portion. Hope that helps. Happy sewing.